I feel like most people become addicted without really meaning to. Like it becomes such a habit, and then the habit becomes an addiction. And then you're just stuck in this cycle to like all of a sudden you're like, when did this even happen?
I've always wanted to kind of understand, like, how is my drinking, right? Where do I kind of fit in? Is it okay the way that I'm drinking? Is it unhealthy for me? Is it healthy or not? Good morning and welcome to our first podcast of How's My Drinking, brought to you by Rhea Health. My name is Aaron and I'm joined by Marcella.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. So Marcella, I wanted to kind of start off the podcast with maybe giving a short intro about ourselves. So my name is Aaron Carpetian. I'm a VP of Marketing here at Rhea Health. And been in Rhea Health for some time, and this is our first podcast again. And we're both going to be kind of leading the podcast and hopefully growing it and getting more listeners. But I'll shoot over to you, Marcella, kind of do an intro.
Yeah, thank you. So like you said, my name is Marcella. It's Marcella Cabay, and I have been with Rhea Health for about 4.5 years now, and I am the director of our enrollment and member support teams. And like Aaron said, this is our first episode, but we are really excited to just bring some conversation around just alcohol addiction and just your relationship with alcohol and just be able to talk about it in a safe space. So welcome.
Yeah, and that's like a pretty good segue into like, what is How's My Drinking, right? What is a podcast? What's it going to be about? What do we want to talk about and, help out our listeners? So How's My Drinking? I think we've been thinking about it for a while, right? It's not something new. We've definitely been having a lot of conversations around it. And for me, the podcast was, I guess a little bit of background, stepping back a little bit, not just, our roles, but as far as drinking's concerned, right? I come from a family where I think drinking's always been kind of this thing where lunchtime, dinner, parents, family members, adults would always kind of like pour some sort of a alcoholic beverage, and essentially that was kind of the drink of choice, right? So I do come from a family background where a lot of people would drink. I never knew if anyone really had a problem. No one in my family really did. And it kind of leads to me where I don't think I have a drinking problem as well, but I'm probably more of that social drinker. So like any event or whatever, if I go to and there's people there, it's start drinking with them, right? So I guess sometimes it gets to a point where I might be drinking a little bit more than I anticipated going onto that day. But I think it's kind of, I don't know, peer pressure maybe, or just the fact that others are doing it. I feel comfortable doing it. So I kind of continue the progress. But I've always wanted to kind of understand, like, how is my drinking, right? Where do I kind of fit in? Is it okay the way that I'm drinking? Is it unhealthy for me? Is it healthy or not? Okay, well, do I truly, where I keep telling myself I don't really have a problem, but it's sometimes when I get home the next day, I'm like really hungover. I drank too much, and it was kind of like, okay, why did I do that? Even if I told myself I don't want to get to that level, but I'm still doing it. So I guess that's why I wanted to kind of, the more we talked about it, that was one reason for me that I wanted to do the podcast. But yeah, what about you? What was kind of the reason for you? Or
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't think you're alone in that. Just all the people that we talk to in the enrollment center are just full of questions, right? Like, how is their drinking? They want to understand their drinking themselves as well. So you're definitely not alone and just kind of wondering where you're at with it. And, for me, it's actually pretty much the opposite. I started drinking when I was 14 years old. So for 17 years, I drank heavily. And I used the excuse of like, to me, drinking equaled fun. I didn't know social events without drinking. And then I was a bartender for a long time. So it was just all I was surrounded with. And as you can imagine, when you start drinking as a 14-year-old, it became an addiction without it, meaning to become one, because my body got so used to it that a few short years later, when I was 18 years old, not even 17 years old, I was going to high school parties, blacking out every weekend. But again, that's kind of all of what my friends were doing. So I didn't realize I had a problem until 3 years ago, I would say. And thankfully, we don't like to use the word alcoholics at Rhea Health, but I am what like society knows as like a functioning alcoholic for a long time. I still had a successful career. Every job that I ever had or that I've ever had, I was very successful. I would end up in management. I have kids. Until, high level surface, I was doing okay. But it really wasn't. I wasn't able to control my drinking. Like I would tell myself, oh, I'll have 3 drinks today and that's it. And I would always end up having 10 or 12 and then being so hungover and miserable the day after. And so I eventually reached a point, truthfully thankful to Rhea Health and because of Rhea Health, that I realized like my drinking's not healthy and I do have a problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where I finally, said enough was enough. Yeah, and because I did try to quit many different times, doing different things or just like slow down my drinking. Like I desperately wanted to become like a normal drinker. And I tried many things like supplements and bribing myself and all kinds of things. And I just couldn't. So well.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that you said too was like, it was kind of like drinking to have fun.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people probably start off that way too. For some, it might even be like lack of communication capabilities, maybe surroundings of people, right? Drinking gets them a little bit more comfortable. And I think, I don't know if it's accurate or not, but I feel like when I was younger, that was probably like one thing too. A lot of people would say it was like, oh, if you drink a little bit, you'll ease up, right? Tensions or whatever. I know that as bad as it might sound, we even did it once at school for speech class, right? A friend of mine, we were pretty nervous going up there and talking to individuals. So we felt that, oh, if we drink a little bit prior to it, we'll feel a lot better. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, like the way that you said that, where it was, you started off as something where it's fun.
Yeah.
And I think that's the tricky part too with alcohol is like, we feel that it's such a substance that's just readily available. It's kind of a different story if it was, an opioids or just other substance. Like, yeah, some people probably do it to have fun, but like, I think there's a lot more dangers involved that people keep thinking.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of us don't think that way when it comes to alcohol.
Yeah, have a drink. And it's like, it's just such a big part of our society that the line is very thin and it gets very blurry.
Yeah. Yeah. Even I think like where they were saying a long time ago, and I think a lot of that wording's kind of changing too, where they kept saying, hey, have a little bit of wine a day and it's good for you.
Yeah.
But I think there's been recent articles too that come out and now they're saying, well, no, that's not really the case. It's not going to be good for you.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. I think a lot of people don't take into consideration that it is an addictive substance to most. And yeah, it's made me, I've been marketing for the industry for about 8 years or so already. And I think I've learned a lot. And now, so I used to drink a lot going to parties with friends, right? It was like clubbing scene back in those days. So it was Tuesday all the way to like Saturday, right? You would probably get a break on a Friday or Thursday, but it was nonstop. And as I got older too, I think I started noticing that there might have been friends at the time that did have a bit of a problem when it came to drinking, right? And it's like you don't notice it because it goes back to what you said earlier. The intention was to go out and have fun. And everyone was kind of accomplishing that, but you didn't realize if certain people were struggling. And as I got older, now with my brother-in-laws that are, around the same age as I was when I was going out, I get worried, right? I tell them, because you never know. It's like, hey, it's great to have fun, right? Enjoy yourself, be around your friends, but like, you don't know if you can potentially get addicted to a certain substance, right? A lot of us really don't know, I think, and I might be somewhat wrong, but I think that's the whole point of this podcast is for us to all get educated. So it's not just the listeners. I think there's a lot for me to still get educated, even though I've been around it for 8+ years. There's just so much to learn.
Yeah, there's so much to learn. And like you said, I feel like most people become addicted without really meaning to. Like it becomes such a habit and then the habit becomes an addiction. And then you're just stuck in this cycle to like all of a sudden you're like, when did this even happen?
Yeah.
But yeah, like I'm definitely excited to bring in some of our doctors and just people in the industry that can, teach not just you and I, but our listeners just about our drinking and just how can we live a healthier life.
Yeah, definitely. Well, before we, do that on our next podcast, if it's okay, I'd like to ask you a couple more questions. At what point were you kind of like, okay, I need to get help? Or
so interesting, like what you said a little bit ago, like, like when we were younger, right? Like going out with our friends and going clubbing and all of that. And like I mentioned earlier, I was a bartender for a long time.
Mhm.
So that's all I was around. Like, close down the bar 3 o'clock in the morning, drink throughout my whole shift. I would have like 8+ shots, during my shift and somehow function to be able to close the bar down because I was also managing these places. So I
Yeah.
had the key to the place. And so drinking during my shift, and then we would go to somebody's house at 3 in the morning, because you all just work together, get off work, go to somebody's house,
Mhm.
keep drinking until 7 o'clock in the morning, go take a nap, and then do it all over again. And I did that for years. And, I actually have a few friends in the bar industry that have died in their 30s.
Wow.
Because of their alcohol addiction, because we started so young and for them it never stopped.
Yeah.
And they drank themselves to death. Some of them, it was like literal actual like liver issues that killed them. And some of them, it was drinking and driving. So, it gets pretty dangerous, and I'm very thankful that I made it out of that stage of my life. But when I finally like realized like I need help,
Mhm.
almost 3 years ago, it was July of 2022, my son was 6 months old.
Mhm.
And like that weekend before, we went to a friend's house and I, per usual, got blacked out drunk. And, I woke up the next morning and I just did not like it. Like I was throwing up and it was just a hot mess. And I was like, you know what? That's it. Like I can't keep doing this. Like I can't. My daughter was already 7 at the time, and she had seen me drunk plenty of times in her lifetime. And I was like, I cannot keep putting them through this or myself.
Yeah.
So that really was the point where I was like, I need to do something about this. Also because I knew better. I had been working for Ria Health for about 2 years at that point.
Got
So
it.
I had the tools that I needed, but that just kind of goes to show that it's such a shamed thing that even though I work for a company that helps people have a better relationship with alcohol, I continue to tell myself, I got this. I don't need anybody else to help me. I'll get it under control. I didn't. So I finally point where I reach out for help.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably one turning point for a lot of individuals is like kind of family and starting to see how they're affecting others. And it's like, okay, it's at a point where I need to maybe get the help, right? It's not going to work for me. I think the past too, historically, like the fact that you're saying you saw their colleagues and friends and kind of go through it and the dangers and what they went through. I mean, it's probably this clicking moment where it's like, okay, I don't want to be that, that level or have that occur to me. Another part that was really interesting, and I want to touch on this, is I think a lot of people think like when you mention, okay, that drinking can affect you a certain way. And the one thing that, like you live or you die from it, I think a lot of people would assume that death from drinking would just be a DUI, right? Getting into a car accident. It's interesting that you brought that up too, where it's not. There's a lot of other health conditions like liver disease, and I'm sure there's probably so much more that we probably haven't thought of. I know there's some maybe new research too that they're talking more about how it affects your brain, right? What alcohol can do to it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think those are really good points to also talk about maybe a future podcast. But yeah,
What's funny about like my story? Like I've always been so athletic and just so focused on health in general, like gut health and inflammation, and I eat healthy. I drink like 90 ounces of water. So I was doing all the right things, but here I was poisoning myself with so much alcohol almost on a daily basis. The math wasn't mathing to like the person that I wanted to be and just be like the healthiest version of myself.
yeah.
But I could not put the alcohol down. So yeah, it's been a journey.
Yeah. So one thing too was like, you kind of mentioned that you were working at the bar. So I would assume that that bar itself, that surrounding is like, it's something that's probably constantly pressuring you and pushing you back to drinking. So do you think, that changed too, like from the bar? Well, it sounds like it might not have been, right? Because you were still, so you kind of said that you were already working at Ria Health and you knew you still had a problem. So how
Yeah.
much of it was kind of your setting, right? Where you were at, as opposed to, okay, now I'm not there. Am I
Yeah.
ready to make the change?
Yeah. I mean, when I was in the bar industry, like, yeah, that's all you're around. So that was like a lot of it, my setting and the people that I knew. But yeah, once I walked away from it, I still just in general in my personal life was using it as a coping mechanism because I had just left my abusive ex-husband. So I was going through a lot of emotional distress and then the healing that comes with it. So it very much became this like coping mechanism to detach myself from the reality of things. So, and that's a lot of why people start using it because they are going through a hard time in life or they're stressed out or they can't sleep. It becomes a crutch for so many things. But at the end of the day, it ends up making them worse. And it's this just vicious cycle.
Yeah, it's really thing. And then as far as like the Ria Health, did you kind of get onto one of the programs at Ria Health, or how did that kind of help out? And then this is the main question we want to ask, right? And I think that's the whole point of the podcast is, how's your drinking now, right?
So I started taking the medication, one of the medications that Ria Health offers to help with cravings, and not even just cravings, but really what it does is like it reprograms your brain to before the time it became addicted. So it's this like you take the medication and then it starts teaching your brain to take away the pleasures that alcohol was giving it. And then you replace that with healthy, activities that also bring you like pleasure. So it's, you're teaching your brain. So yeah, I got on the medication and that was life changing.
And sorry, what's the medication? Because I know we offer multiple at Ria Health. So
yeah, so the one that worked very well for me, so I didn't have to try any others, was naltrexone.
Okay.
I am what they call in like the industry in general, like a fast responder to it.
Mm-hmm.
By fast, I mean it still took about 4.5 months for me to reach what's called like the extinction point. So I do want to just make sure people understand that this is not like Tylenol. Like you have a headache, you take Tylenol, goes away in an hour. This is truly like you have to give it time because you didn't become addicted to it overnight. It's not going to magically disappear. But the medication was very helpful. 50% of it was, like part of my success was 50% the medication. But the other 50%, and this is really what helps you with long-term change, is really, working through your emotions and your triggers. Like, what is it that's making you reach for the drink instead of reaching for water or working out or something else?
Yeah.
So I had already been in trauma therapy for a few years. So I had a really good handle of like my triggers and what was happening. Mm-hmm. So I continued my therapy alongside the medication and just replacing my drinking days. Now I was replacing them with going to the gym and getting back into reading. So that's what I did for my recovery journey. And at first, I wanted to become a normal drinker. I didn't think I had any desire to like not ever drink again. And so that's what I did for a while. I became a social drinker. I was able to with our family or like have game night and take my naltrexone and have like a drink or two. And that was life changing for me because before it was like 8 or 10, not 1 or 2 or 3 drinks. So I did that for about the first year. And then it truly just got to a point where I really was not craving it anymore.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, like not at all. Not even during social events. And that was my biggest fear. I truly had fear of like, how am I supposed to go to social events without drinking? Like, I'm going to be the only one. Yeah. Am I going to have any fun? Like, what is this life? So it was really good for me that I got to gradually like just drink a little bit less and then maybe just have one drink. And then to be like, I actually remember my first social event was one of my niece's birthday parties. And I was like, I'm going to drink today, see how it goes. And it was fine. And I survived and I wasn't craving it and I ate the cake. And so after that, I was like, I'm just going to keep trying it and see how it goes. And I mean, I just don't crave it anymore. And it's been pretty awesome.
That's good. That's awesome. So let me ask this one question. Probably people have the same question themselves, but how did your family take it, right? Or when did they kind of know about it or find out? I'm curious, like the starting point, right? And then even when you're in treatment, right, where you're kind of taking the medication, you're slowing down progression, how is your family reacting at that point when, like, let's say were they worried about inviting you to, like you said, like an event? Not obviously if, just for yourself, like, is it gonna, we don't want Marcella to be kind of feeling bad and all that kind of stuff. How is that progression, right? Early on to a point where you're kind of seeking treatment to now where, you're saying you're not drinking at all. How did that go?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I find it very interesting that nobody ever in my life was like, Marcella, you have a drinking problem. Like nobody ever brought it up to me. And I find that so interesting because I very much did, but nobody ever did. So it really was just me kind of saying like, hey, I don't like the way that I've been drinking. So I'm going to start taking this medication and take it seriously because I don't want to keep blacking out. I don't want to keep doing this to myself and my kids.
Yeah.
So I will say though, my husband at first was a little bit like, I guess apprehensive. I'm not really sure the word to use, but essentially, I was his drinking buddy. And, we met out dancing. So we would go out and we would drink. So I was, at first it was like, and I was worried too, like, how is this going to change our relationship? But thankfully it didn't. It actually made both of us healthier because also my type of personality, I was very much the instigator of like, everybody let's take some shots and let's shotgun a beer. So because I decided to slow down on my drinking, my family slowed down too because I'm not the one like instigating it.
Yeah.
Well, it's this ripple effect of like made me healthier, made my husband healthier. Like he doesn't drink at home during the week at all anymore. Only when we go out like to social events. I don't think they've ever been worried. Like, like invite her to events. But at first they would offer me a drink and I would just, no, I'm okay, thank you. But yeah, they never really made a big deal. They were super supportive. I will say though, if this would have been the case with my ex-husband that I chose to not drink, did it a few times with him that I was like, no, I don't want to drink tonight. It would cause huge fights because again, like I was in a very toxic marriage.
Yeah.
So if you don't have somebody supporting you, this can be extremely difficult for you to do.
I'm also curious with that scenario then with your ex-husband, did he understand that this might have been a problem or just it didn't even matter, right? It was just like, hey, I just want to have fun. You should be having fun with me.
Yeah, unfortunately for him, he was severely addicted too.
Got it. Okay.
He suffers of like schizophrenia and it was just, how dare me not want to drink and have fun with him. And I know that's the case a lot in abusive relationships. Like one of the partners wants to better themselves. The other one's like, no, because this is the only way I can control you. So it's extremely difficult to be able to get the help you need if you don't have support at home.
Got it. Yeah. Your surroundings. Definitely. Yeah. That's why, we say, and you kind of touched on it too. It's not just taking the medication, right? It's being able to have some of these discussions. Some of us might, like, you mentioned that you had your family as well. You had other individuals. Certain people might not, right? They might just have that one person that, like you said, it might be controlling or leading the decision factors. And if you're only taking the medication piece, you're not getting that additional level of help, right? You're not really talking to someone where they'll tell you that this is it. This is the part that's really affecting it. Because I think we all probably have a trigger that maybe leads us to drinking as well. Even if fun could be one of them, obviously, but I think there's other things that we talked about this a long time ago with COVID too. I mean, COVID, I think really made a lot of people start drinking and more than they probably do. And it just wasn't healthy for a lot of individuals. So yeah, I mean, it's really interesting.
We heard that a lot actually in 2020, like at RIA Health, like people calling in and just being like, I'm just bored. And I started drinking out of boredom and now I can't stop. So we heard that actually all through like 2020 to 2022-ish. Like we were still, and people tell us, I started drinking like this during COVID and I can't get away from it. So.
Yeah. Well, let me ask one last question and then we'll end our first podcast. But, for listeners that are probably at a place where they do want to seek help, like what do you recommend? How should they start? Where should they look?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's so many good resources out there nowadays, thankfully. Back in the day it was either just AA or like going to rehab and like those were the only options. But thankfully that's not the case anymore. And like we said, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Like if you are at a place where you're like, you either want to quit drinking or just like become like a normal drinker, like I mentioned earlier, You don't have to completely quit cold turkey. Definitely wouldn't recommend that in the first place. But there are resources out there such as Ria Health that have like the professional guidance to really help you be successful with this, like the medication, like I mentioned, the coaching component of it, and just having that support and resources. But I would say the first and biggest step is you truly saying like, I want to do this. Like you have to be convinced yourself that you want to do something about it so you can be successful with it and give it the time that it needs.
Mhm.
And then as far as the resources, honestly, just start reaching out and then see what's going to be the best option for you and take it one day at a time. Like I said, it's definitely not overnight. It's not going to look perfect. Healing's not linear by any means. You're going to have some great days. You're going to have some bad days, but you have to keep going because the consistency is really what's going to get you there.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. I think one big thing too that I really got out of this, thank you for your story, by the way. I think it's very helpful, especially for a lot of listeners. But I think the biggest thing that I'm getting out of this was, so prior to marketing in Ria Health, I was marketing at other facilities that were physical rehab centers, right? So one model with a lot of them, and then there's nothing wrong with it, is full abstinence, right? So the idea is to fully quit drinking. And I think when they remove you from your element and you're in a program for 20, 30 days, it's really easy, right? There's no drinking allowed. So it's common sense. But then what ends up happening with a lot of people is they get put back into their elements, right? And they kind of could start drinking again. Again, these facilities a lot of them are great, right? And they do have the therapy sessions. They do try to uncover what is leading to your drinking and so on. But it might be hard for people when they go back, right? So some of them continue the path. And I know a lot of people in recovery, a lot of good friends that I've met throughout the process that I still speak with, and they've been doing an awesome job. But there's some that certain things cause them to relapse again, right? So I guess my point I'm trying to make is that moderation, where it's lowering your drinking, has always kind of been frowned upon. Definitely, I think could be frowned upon on certain things like when you touched on earlier, liver disease. You can't lower your drinking, right? When you're struggling with a health condition that alcohol is part of that, yeah, you have to quit. But I think the biggest thing that I'd love listeners to take away from this whole message was you were a heavy drinker from the sounds of it, obviously, right? You understood there was a problem. You started getting treatment, but early on, you were focused on moderation, right? And now, out of your own will, you're like, I'm not even drinking anymore. I quit, right? So I think that's really interesting is like it started with a level of moderation, right, as a goal. And even though you didn't have a goal to fully quit, you're at that phase now.
Yeah.
So you are doing what a lot of people might have wanted, which is the abstinence piece. So I think that's where I think you and I both feel that this podcast is really going to help people understand that there isn't just one option, just like there isn't just one type of person, right? There's multitude of individuals with different scenarios and different cases. And I think the biggest thing is to really understand what are all the ways you could get help and which one fits best with you. And I think that's what Ria Health is doing a great job of doing, right? We're kind of meeting the individuals where they're at. But again, it's not just us. There's a lot of programs out there that are doing that. And it's just up to you to uncover what is best for you. And I think that's what we're hoping this podcast is going to do. We're definitely going to have more guests down the line where both you and I will kind of, ask them some questions, maybe learn from them. Just so our listeners are also aware, we do have a website, which is howsmydrinking.show. You'll be able to see all of our podcasts there. You'll see what other channels we're in. We're going to be in Spotify. We're going to be in Apple. We're going to have a YouTube channel. And then there's obviously a lot of our social media channels, both in Ria Health and How's My Drinking, where you'll be able to see upcoming guests, and also on the website. One thing I want to touch on too is we will have a contact area where anyone can go in there and kind of leave their feedback, what they thought about the podcast. But if there's someone that you find very interesting, you love us to have on the show and kind of talk to them, particular topics you love us to go over, please, fill out that contact form and let us know. And we'd be happy to try to kind of build a podcast around it. Yeah. Before we end it, anything else, Marcel, you want to maybe share or say?
Yeah, I'm just hopeful that this podcast will really serve as just education for people and removing the stigma around just understanding your drinking. Maybe you don't have a problem with it and that's okay, but maybe you want to learn how to drink less or maybe to use it as support for a loved one. But I just want this to be a safe place where people can come to for information without feeling judged. So yeah, I'm really excited and thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks. Awesome. Okay. We'll talk soon. Bye.